Welcome back. Let's turn to the other big story today, the top developments on the race for a COVID vaccine. The big news that's coming in is from US pharma giant Moderna, which has announced it is now planning to request emergency use authorization from its vaccine from regulators in the US and European Union by the month of December. Full results from the late-stage study claim Moderna shows that the vaccine was 94.1% effective with no serious safety concerns. It also claims to have reported a 100% success rate in preventing severe cases of COVID. Meanwhile, the Pune-based Serum Institute of India has filed a 100 crore defamation suit against an individual who claims that a Chennai-based volunteer who took part in vaccine trials, the volunteer claims to have suffered from neurological and psychological after effects as a result of taking the dose. Remember, the 40-year-old had earlier sought 5 crore as compensation from the Serum Institute of India. One final update on that. Prime Minister Modi, meanwhile, held a virtual meeting with 3 firms engaged in vaccine development. The teams the Prime Minister interacted with were from Genova Biopharma, Biological E and Dr Reddy's. Remember, the Prime Minister had also interacted with the other firms over the weekend and had raised the issues about how the vaccine process should be taken forward. Amidst all this news, I'm joined by a very special guest. Joining me now, Dr Gagandeep Kang, top vaccine scientist. She's professor at the Christian Medical College in Vellore. Appreciate your joining us, Dr Kang. I want to understand from you, I spoke to you a couple of weeks ago. Then there was also a lot of buzz about vaccines. That exuberance seems to have only increased. Now Moderna claiming 100% efficacy, but there are also concerns at some level about safety norms in the context of these vaccines. Should the exuberance be tempered by an element of caution in your view? How do you see it?
I don't think that we need to cautious, because the news that we've had from the mRNA vaccines and from the vaccines that are based on adenovirus vectored platforms is good. What has been in the media lately has been a series of information about the Covaxin vaccine and about the Serum Institute vaccine, where serious adverse events have been reported. Serious adverse events are a feature of all clinical trials. When you test any drug or vaccine on a large number of people, sometimes things will not go the way that they are intended, and people can get very sick. But the question of whether the serious adverse event was related to the product that was being tested or not needs to be determined by experts. And at the moment, it isn't clear who has made a determination of what kind regarding the events that have happened with both of the vaccine trials in India.
You know, let me come specifically to those vaccine trials, because in the case of Serum Institute, for example, one patient who was a clinical 3 trial patient claimed that he had got after effects as an adverse after effects as a result of taking the vaccine, threatened to sue Serum Institute. Serum Institute now in turn is planning to sue for defamation. All of this creates a lot of noise, less news. Should we be separating the noise from the news? How concerned should we be?
I think we should. What needs to be done is whenever anybody has an adverse event in a trial, the first priority is to make sure that they are looked after. It doesn't matter whether it's related or unrelated. Whatever support that person needs to be provided by the medical team that is responsible for the clinical trial. That support comes first, and then investigations that are aimed at defining the cause of that illness. And those may be routine investigations, they may be specialized investigations, you may want consultations with other medical teams, but all of that has to be done, and that information has to be provided in a timely fashion to the institutional ethics committee, to the sponsor of the trial, and for all regulatory trials to the regulator as well. At this stage, It is not a determination of relatedness. Of the trial is asked to give his opinion, and then the determination is made not by the company, but by the independent data safety monitoring board that wished to protect the safety of participants in the trial.
Where I am coming from, or where many people are coming from, Dr. Kang, is the fear being expressed by some that some of those very regulatory processes could get short-circuited because there is this desperation, urgency to have a corona vaccine as early as possible, and therefore safety and efficacy could get compromised. Are those concerns legitimate in your view, that regulatory approvals could get fast-forwarded given the kind of climate that is being created in this country and across the world?
I don't think that it would be to take that kind of pressure. We saw it first in the US, and the Food and Drug Administration resisted that pressure very effectively, publishing its requirements for vaccine. Made it clear that even if efficacy data were available from phase 3 trials, they would not be willing to accept a dossier for an authorization without having at least 2 months of safety data from at least half of the vaccine trial participants. So that is a really large safety case that they are asking for. The WHO, in fact, went one step further and wants to see at least 3 months of safety data after the last dose of the vaccine. So I think the regulators are doing what is required. They are specifying what is the minimum amount of information they want to see before they would be willing to consider an emergency use authorization, which is very restricted, very monitored use of a product. Now, in India, we generally tend to follow the recommendations of the FDA, the EMA, as well as the WHO. But I'm pretty sure that our regulators will not be stepping out of line where asking for the right amount of information is concerned. And if I was to compare this to other clinical trials for vaccines, the data set is comparable. What we don't have is long-term safety data, and we don't have data on very rare, but that tends to come even post-licensure.
So are you telling me there is very little chance of political pressure operating, given this vaccine nationalism in this country and abroad, that will affect the safety and efficacy of the vaccine, this rush that our politicians have, let's get a vaccine as soon as possible? Are you reasonably secure that the regulator will not succumb to political pressure?
I am reasonably secure about it. I certainly hope that what happened in China is not going to happen here. And with the kind of media, the kind of researchers, the kind of regulators that we have in this country, I'm pretty confident that the science will determine what needs to be done in terms of process.
You know, one of the reasons why people are wary of celebrating is what happened with AstraZeneca and Oxford's vaccine. There are concerns being expressed now whether a half-a-dose vaccine, as Oxford AstraZeneca claimed, could actually be more successful or efficacious than a full vaccine. Do you share those concerns that how can a half-dose vaccine get 90% success and a full-dose vaccine get 62%? Should we be looking at all these issues much more carefully before celebrating and wait really for the final trials?
I think we definitely need to look at the issue. Optimizing the performance of a vaccine requires the right kind of clinical trials. If we want to go for 2 half doses, we can't do that without a trial. But if we are to speak about getting a restricted permission to use this vaccine, we can do that on the basis of the pre-specified data that show us over 60% efficacy in the trials in the UK and Brazil. I don't think we should necessarily be looking at the 90% at this time, that should come later stage.
So let me ask a layman's question. 60% efficacy, as the Oxford vaccine seems to suggest. As a layman, one wonders at a time when many are claiming 90%, is 60% good enough? Given the fact that AstraZeneca Oxford is most likely to be suitable for Indian conditions, Serum Institute, which is in partnership, plans to apply for emergency use in a couple of weeks. Does that look to you good enough for the vaccine to be to apply for emergency use?
Absolutely. In fact, if we look at what the FDA and WHO had said, anything over 50% we'd be happy to take. And that 50% came with a range where the lower bound of that range was 30% performance. So the fact that we have a vaccine that's at 60%, that's a very successful vaccine. It's important to remember there are ranges around these estimates. So it won't be exactly 60%, but whatever it is, a 60% vaccine can change the face of disease and transmission. If you look at what we are doing with the rotavirus vaccine, that has 55% efficacy. The polio vaccine actually has 60% efficacy for a single dose, and we are close to wiping out polio from the earth. The malaria vaccine that is now in use, countries in Africa are asking for that vaccine, that has only 30% efficacy. So preventing a common disease, even a low percentage of a common disease, can have significant benefits for public health. I'd be happy with the 60% vaccine.
That's reassuring, Dr. Kang, very reassuring. But the reason why I was asking you this, ma'am, in a way was I was just reading the CEO of Merck, one of the world's leading pharma companies, saying that the fastest vaccine they ever developed into the market was from mumps, and that took about 4 years. Ebola took 5.5 years. TB took 13 years. Chickenpox took 28 years. And therefore, what was worrying him is that the public seemed so eager and desperate to get back to normal that they were pushing us to move things faster and faster on COVID. This is what he said in an interview to the Harvard Business School. Do you believe that this is a cautionary note that we need to be a little careful before we are in a real position to say, yes, we have a corona vaccine?
So Ken Fraser is talking about vaccines that were developed a while ago. The Merck vaccine, the mumps vaccine, developed by Merck, in fact, was in 1967, when it took 4 years to develop that vaccine. Vaccine science has come a really long way since then. And if it hadn't been for SARS going away, for Zika being deprioritized, I think we would have had vaccine development programs that were a lot faster if there was support for those vaccine programs. It isn't like we didn't make a SARS vaccine, there just wasn't disease to test it in. Pretty much the same thing happened for Zika. When Zika was being blown up all over the place, in Zika, and then when the disease kind of died down, they killed their programs for vaccine development. The Ebola vaccine, which was sitting in a freezer for 20 years before it was finally evaluated in subjects, the clinical studies actually took about 6 months in West Africa, which is a very difficult environment in which to work, with a vaccine that was held at -70. The landscape has changed quite significantly. Merck is a multinational company with a great deal of experience in the development of vaccines, but the kinds of partnerships and the kind of science that we are seeing is actually making me quite ambitious about what the next pandemic might look like. Instead of waiting 10 months, could we get a vaccine in 6? I think it's feasible.
You're saying it's feasible. Interestingly, you gave the example of Zika, man, because the AIMS director, Dr. Randeep Guleria, seemed to suggest that just maybe herd immunity may set in even before a COVID vaccine becomes available to all. With Zika, the virus, as you said, actually ebbed even before you got a vaccine. Are you still confident of a vaccine available to all by middle of 2021?
I'm still confident of a vaccine by the middle of 2021. The thing is, Zika is something that we knew. We didn't know a lot about the epidemiology, but it was not a new virus. And the same goes for many of the outbreaks that we have had before, except for SARS and MERS coronaviruses. So I think in this situation, we don't know how long protection will last. We know it will likely be more than 6 months, but will it be a year? Will it be 20? Will it be lifelong? Given other coronaviruses, I'm a little doubtful about lifelong. I'm even a little bit doubtful about 20 years, though that's more a gut feeling than. But I think that we will have to think about the epidemiology of this virus. The fact that multiple people have been exposed does not necessarily mean that they have lifelong protection against the virus. How long will their protection from natural infection last? We will have to follow them up to find out, and immunization programs based on the information that accrues from now to when we start vaccinations.
You know, in one of your interviews, you raised an important point that I wanted clarification on. You said people must be brought to the vaccine, especially in a country like India, as far-flung as we are, rather than the vaccine being taken to the people. Is that going to really become the challenge? Not just vaccine development, but distribution and ensuring that it reaches those who need it most.
Absolutely. Distribution and delivery are going to be huge challenges. We are talking about potentially vaccinating the bulk of the country. We've never done anything like this before. When we do immunization programs, we vaccinate pretty much during the first year of life and during pregnancy. Now we are talking about everybody everywhere, in stages, but still everybody everywhere. And that is a challenge on a scale I cannot even begin to imagine. We're just lucky that we have the largest immunization program in the world, but I cannot believe that that program will not be challenged to deliver vaccines in the coming few years.
You know, in that sense, Dr. Kang, listening to you, one feels a bit reassured, reasonably confident. Given India's experience of immunization programs, can we be reasonably confident that as we reach the end of 2020, this annus horribilis, that the glass is more or less half full on vaccine development and potentially on distribution?
The glass is definitely half full. I'm so pleased by everything that scientists have done. I think our challenges now are going to be communications, to make sure that people understand and don't have the unreasonable hope about which you had spoken a little while earlier. Vaccines are great. Vaccines are not coming tomorrow. Vaccines are not the only solution. So we need to take a holistic view of the pandemic and make sure that we bring science to all our decision-making about control and prevention.
Dr. Kang, as always, a pleasure talking to you. It's good to get news without the noise, and people like you, experts like you, are allowing us to separate that. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us the reassurances on vaccine development that lie ahead. Appreciate that for sharing your wisdom. That's what we do on the news today at a time